Part 1. The Discovery. The first anomaly appeared in sample 127. I almost missed it. A subtle variation in the CHRM1 gene sequence that didn't match any known polymorphism in our database. It was late, the lab empty except for me, the soft hum of equipment and occasional ping from my computer the only sounds breaking the silence. I'd been analyzing genomic data for 14 hours straight, my eyes burning from staring at sequence alignments. "That's odd," I murmured, enlarging the section on my screen. The variation appeared in a highly conserved region of the gene, a section that had remained virtually unchanged throughout human evolution. Such regions typically control critical functions, making natural mutations rare and usually detrimental. Yet, this variation showed none of the hallmarks of a random mutation. It was too precise, too structured, almost like it was designed, I whispered, the implication sending a chill through me despite the warmth of the lab. I quickly cross-referenced sample 127 with our study parameters. The DNA belonged to a 34-year-old male who had reported frequent sleep paralysis episodes accompanied by vivid visual hallucinations, precisely the phenotype our study was investigating. Sleep paralysis had fascinated me since graduate school, that terrifying state where consciousness returns during REM sleep while the body remains immobilized, often accompanied by hallucinations of a presence in the room. The scientific literature attributed these experiences to the brain's confusion during sleep-wake transitions. But the consistency of the reported hallucinations across different cultures and time periods had always struck me as peculiar, which is why I designed this study, to investigate whether there might be a genetic component to sleep paralysis with visual hallucinations. We had collected DNA samples from 500 individuals who experienced regular episodes and were comparing them to 500 controls who had never experienced the phenomenon. I hadn't expected to find anything this striking. Pulling up the other analyzed samples, I quickly wrote a script to search for the same variation. By morning, I had my answer. The unusual sequence appeared in 86% of the sleep paralysis subjects and in none of the controls. I sat back in my chair, mind racing. This was more than a correlation. It was a clear genetic marker for the condition. But the nature of the variation itself raised disturbing questions. It didn't resemble natural genetic drift or random mutation. The precision of the changes, the specific nucleotides affected, all pointed to deliberate design. But that was impossible. The technology to engineer such specific genetic modifications had only existed for a few decades. This variation appeared to be ancient, present in diverse populations across different ethnic backgrounds. I needed more data, more samples, more analysis, and I needed to be absolutely certain before sharing these findings with anyone. Dr. Chen, your results are unprecedented. Dr. Elias Harrington, chair of the genetics department at Westlake University, studied the data I'd presented with a deepening frown. We sat in his spacious office, morning light streaming through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced between us like tiny galaxies. "I've triple-checked everything," I assured him. "The association is undeniable. This specific genetic variation appears in 83% of our expanded sample of sleep paralysis subjects and in less than 0.3% of controls." "It's not the association I'm questioning, Eleanor," he replied, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "It's the nature of the variation itself. You're suggesting this is an engineered genetic sequence?" "I'm suggesting it doesn't match any pattern of natural mutation we've ever documented," I clarified. "The changes are too precise, too functional. They modify the receptor structure in a way that would be highly unlikely to occur randomly." "And you believe this relates to the hallucinations during sleep paralysis episodes?" I nodded. The CHRM1 gene codes for the M1 muscarinic acetylcholine receptor, which is involved in REM sleep regulation and certain types of visual processing. This variation appears to modify the receptor's binding properties in a very specific way. It could potentially allow the visual cortex to process input that would normally be filtered out. Harrington replaced his glasses, his expression troubled. "You understand the implications of what you're suggesting? That someone, or something, engineered a genetic modification in humans thousands of years ago Before we had even discovered DNA? I understand it sounds incredible, I acknowledged. That's why I need your approval to expand the study. We need more samples from diverse populations, ancient DNA analysis, and functional studies of the receptor variant. He was silent for a long moment, staring at the data on his tablet. Finally, he sighed. Write up the proposal. I'll support the funding request. But Eleanor, he fixed me with a serious gaze. Be careful how you frame this. Stick to the data, the correlation with sleep paralysis. Leave out any speculation about genetic engineering until we have more evidence. Of course, I agreed, relief washing over me. I needed institutional support to pursue this further, even if it meant temporarily, downplaying the most extraordinary aspects of the discovery. As I gathered my materials to leave, Harrington asked, "Have you ever experienced sleep paralysis yourself, Dr. Chen?" "No," I replied. "Never. I'm one of the lucky ones, I suppose." His expression was unreadable. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you simply haven't been activated yet." The odd choice of words lingered with me as I left his office, a subtle disquiet settling in my stomach. Activated. As if the genetic variation were a switch waiting to be flipped. The expanded study progressed rapidly over the next 6 months. We collected thousands of additional samples, focusing particularly on individuals with frequent and vivid sleep paralysis experiences. The genetic marker, which we now called the SP1 variant, showed consistent association with the condition across all populations studied. More intriguing were the results from ancient DNA analysis. We found the SP1 variant in human remains dating back at least 30,000 years, with the oldest confirmed sample from a Paleolithic site in southern France. The variant appeared suddenly in the genetic record, with no evolutionary precursors, as if it had been inserted fully formed into the human genome. Even more puzzling, the frequency of the variant had remained remarkably stable throughout human history, appearing in approximately 17 to 20% of every population we studied, regardless of geographic isolation. This defied standard models of genetic drift, which would predict varying frequencies in different populations over time. "It's being maintained," Dr. Sarah Keller, our population geneticist, observed during a team meeting. "Some selective pressure is keeping the frequency stable across diverse populations, or it's being actively managed," suggested Dr. Marcus Way, our computational biologist, earning skeptical looks from several team members. I remained focused on the functional aspects of the variation. Our laboratory studies confirmed that the SP1 variant modified the acetylcholine receptor in a way that could potentially alter visual processing during REM sleep. Neurons expressing the variant responded to stimulus frequencies that normal neurons filtered out, as if they were tuned to detect signals that standard human physiology ignored. The implications were profound, but I remained cautious in my official reports, emphasizing the correlation with sleep paralysis while minimizing speculation about the variant's origins. Privately, however, I couldn't stop thinking about the precision of the modification, its sudden appearance in the genetic record, and its stable frequency across populations. It looked designed, it looked maintained, it looked purposeful. But who or what could have engineered human genetics 30,000 years ago? And why target the specific neurological pathways involved in sleep-wake transitions and visual processing? These questions consumed me, driving me to work longer hours, sleep less, push harder for answers. My colleagues noticed the change, their concerned glances following me as I moved through the lab like a woman possessed. "You need rest, Eleanor," Sarah told me one evening, finding me still at my computer well past midnight. "You've been working 16-hour days for weeks." "I'm fine," I insisted, not looking away from the screen where I was comparing SP1 frequencies across different historical periods. "No, you're not," she countered, gently closing my laptop. "You're obsessed, and you're starting to sound like those ancient alien theorists on late-night television." That stung, especially coming from Sarah, whose scientific rigor I deeply respected. The data shows a genetic variant strongly associated with sleep paralysis," she interrupted. "Everything beyond that is speculation. We don't have evidence of ancient genetic engineering, just an unusual variant with an unclear evolutionary history. Then how do you explain its sudden appearance, its precise modifications, its stable frequency across isolated populations? Don't, she admitted. Not yet. That's how science works, Eleanor. We don't jump to the most extraordinary explanation when we encounter something we don't understand. We gather more data, develop testable hypotheses, rule out conventional explanations first. She was right, of course. I was letting the extraordinary nature of the discovery cloud my scientific judgment. But something deep within me felt certain. We were on the edge of a revelation that would transform our understanding of human history, and perhaps consciousness itself. Go home, Sarah insisted. Get some sleep. Look at everything with fresh eyes tomorrow. I nodded, suddenly aware of the exhaustion weighing on my body. You're right. I'll pick this up tomorrow. The drive home was a blur, my mind still racing, with genetic sequences and evolutionary puzzles despite my physical fatigue. My apartment felt cold and unfamiliar, as if I were entering it for the first time, or returning after a very long absence. I moved through my evening routine mechanically. A quick meal, a hot shower, a half-hearted attempt to read something unrelated to work. But the SP1 variant continued to dominate my thoughts as I finally lay down to sleep. The last thing I remember before drifting off was wondering what it would be like to experience sleep paralysis firsthand, to feel the terrifying immobility, to see the hallucinations that so many of our study participants had described in vivid, consistent detail. I would soon find out. Part 2. The Visitation. I woke to absolute stillness. My eyes opened to the darkness of my bedroom, but my body remained frozen, immobile as stone. Panic surged immediately. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even wiggle my fingers or toes. Only my eyes could shift, darting frantically around the room. Sleep paralysis. I recognized it instantly, the clinical understanding doing nothing to mitigate the primal terror of being conscious yet completely paralyzed. My mind raced. This shouldn't be happening. I'd never experienced sleep paralysis before. I'd tested negative for the SP1 variant in our control screening. Then I saw, in the corner of my bedroom where shadows gathered densest, something moved. Not the familiar movement of curtains in a breeze or the shifting shadows cast by passing cars. This was deliberate, purposeful, the movement of something with awareness. A figure gradually resolved from the darkness, tall and slender, with proportions that seemed subtly wrong, as if assembled from a different template than human anatomy. It had no distinct features I could discern, just a suggestion of limbs and a head-like upper portion, its form rippling slightly like heat shimmer on a hot road. I tried to scream, to thrash against the paralysis, but remained locked in place, able only to watch as the figure glided toward my bed with fluid grace. A pressure built in my chest, constricting my breathing, my heart hammering so violently I feared it might burst. The entity stopped at the foot of my bed, regarding me with what felt like intense curiosity despite its lack of discernible eyes. Then it spoke, not aloud but directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. Observer, at last. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It simply was, a presence in my consciousness that conveyed meaning with perfect clarity. You have found the marker. You have begun to understand. I couldn't respond, verbally, but somehow it perceived my questions, my fear, my desperate confusion. Your kind were modified long ago, it continued. Selected to serve as viewers, bridges between realities. The ability to perceive us was carefully engineered into your genetic code. An image formed in my mind, not a memory, but a vision being shown to me. Ancient humans gathered around a light that wasn't fire, wasn't sunlight, but something other. Figures like the one before me moving among them, touching their foreheads. A sensation of change, of alteration at the most fundamental level. The connection was necessary. Communication between our realms required biological interfaces. Your ancestors were chosen. Another image. Humans in primitive dwellings lying, Still, while entities like this one hovered near them during sleep, information flowing between them, a symbiotic exchange. But something failed. The connection weakened. The viewers began to fear what they saw. The knowledge was lost. I managed a single coherent thought. What are you? We are the architects. We exist in the adjacent frequency to your reality. We have always been here, alongside your world but separate from it. The genetic modification was our attempt to establish communication. Why? I thought. Why did you need to communicate with us? Mutual benefit. Exchange of knowledge. Preparation. Preparation. For what? Instead of answering directly, it moved closer, looming over me. A limb-like appendage reached toward my face. I would have recoiled if I could move, but remained frozen as it touched my forehead with what felt like cold electricity. Your research has activated dormant pathways. The marker responds to awareness. You have begun the repair. Repair? I didn't understand. I hadn't modified anything. I'd only discovered the variant, studied its effects. Awareness is the key. Recognition activates the connection. You have recognized the marker for what it is. Others will follow. The pressure of its touch increased, sending jolts of sensation through my paralyzed body. I felt something changing. Within me, neural pathways shifting, receptors reconfiguring. The terror redoubled as I realized it was altering me somehow, activating something that had been dormant. You will serve as the primary node in the renewed network. Through you, others will connect. The repair has begun. With those final words, the entity withdrew its touch. The paralysis began to fade, sensation returning to my extremities in a wave of pins and needles. The figure moved back toward the corner, its form becoming less distinct, merging with the shadows. As mobility returned, I sat up gasping, my body trembling violently. The corner where the entity had stood was empty, just ordinary darkness, no sign of the visitor. Had it been a hallucination, a vivid dream? The rational scientist in me immediately sought explanations: stress, exhaustion, suggestion from immersing myself in sleep paralysis research. Perhaps I'd experienced a conventional episode triggered by sleep deprivation and an overactive imagination saturated with the subject matter. But as my breathing steadied and my mind cleared, I knew with bone-deep certainty that what had happened was real. The entity had been present in my room. It had communicated with me, and it had changed something within me. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone and called Sarah. "I need to come to the lab," I said when she answered, my voice unsteady. "Now, I need to run my DNA again." "Eleanor, it's 3 a.m. What's wrong?" "I experienced sleep paralysis. I saw something. I need to check if I have the variant now." A long pause. "That's not how genetics works, Eleanor. Your DNA doesn't change overnight." "Please," I insisted. "I'll explain when I see you. But I need to know." Perhaps it was the desperation in my voice, or perhaps her own scientific curiosity, but she agreed to meet me at the lab in an hour. The drive there was surreal. The pre-dawn city empty and still, as if I were moving through a different reality than the one I'd inhabited yesterday. The entity's words echoed in my mind. The marker responds to awareness. You have begun the repair. Sarah was waiting at the lab entrance, concern evident in her expression as she took in my disheveled appearance. "You look terrible," she said, bluntly. "Are you sure you don't need medical attention instead of a DNA test?" "I'm physically fine," I assured her. "But something happened, Sarah. Something I can't explain." In the lab, I quickly prepared a sample of my own blood for analysis, focusing on the specific region containing the SP1 variant. Sarah watched silently, her skepticism clear but held in check by friendship and professional respect. The results appeared on the screen an hour later, and we both stared in disbelief. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. The SP1 variant was clearly present in my DNA, the same precise modification we'd identified in our sleep paralysis subjects. The same variant that had been absent when I'd tested myself as a control subject 6 months earlier. "Run it again," Sarah insisted. "There must be contamination or a sample mix-up." We ran the test 3 more times, with the same result each time. The variant was undeniably present in my genome. "This can't happen," Sarah said, pacing the lab. "Genetic sequences don't spontaneously change in adult cells. It violates everything we know about molecular biology." I sat quietly, the entities, words replaying in my mind. "Your research has activated dormant pathways. The marker responds to awareness." "What if it was always there?" I suggested. "What if the variant exists in multiple states, and only one state is detectable by our current methods?" Sarah stopped pacing. "Like a quantum superposition? That's not how DNA works." "We don't know how this DNA works," I countered. "We've already established that it doesn't follow normal evolutionary patterns. What if the modification includes properties we don't understand yet? Properties that allow it to shift between states based on certain triggers?" "What triggers?" she asked, though I could see she already suspected my answer. "Awareness. Recognition. The entity said my research activated dormant pathways, not just in me, but potentially in others with the marker." Sarah's expression shifted from scientific skepticism to personal concern. "Entity? Eleanor, you need to tell me exactly what happened last night." I described the sleep paralysis episode in detail. The paralysis, the figure emerging from the shadows, the telepathic communication, the cold electric touch that seemed to change something within me. As I spoke, I could see Sarah struggling between her friendship with me and her scientific worldview, which had no framework for what I was describing. "The most likely explanation is that you experienced a conventional sleep paralysis episode with hallucinations," she said gently, when I finished. "The content was influenced by your immersion in our research. As for the DNA results, I don't have an explanation yet, but there must be one that doesn't involve entities from another dimension rewriting your genetic code." "Then how do you explain this?" I pulled up my previous DNA results from our control study, displaying them side by side with the new analysis. Same person, same genetic region, completely different sequence, 6 months apart. She studied the screens, frowning. "I can't explain it, not yet. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, Eleanor. One unexplained genetic change doesn't prove the existence of interdimensional beings who engineered humanity." "What about the other evidence?" I pressed. "The sudden appearance of the variant in the genetic record. Its maintenance at stable frequencies across isolated populations. Its precise modifications to neural receptors involved in specific types of perception. All interesting data points that need further investigation," she acknowledged. "But not proof of your architects." I could see I wasn't going to convince her. Not yet, anyway. The scientist in me understood her position perfectly. If our roles were reversed, I'd likely respond with the same measured skepticism. "What's our next step, then?" I asked, accepting the temporary impasse. Sarah considered for a moment. "We need to monitor your DNA over time, see if the variant remains stable or reverts. And we should expand our functional studies of the SP1 variant, specifically how it affects perception during sleep-wake transitions. And if I experience another visitation? Document everything. Record your room if possible. And call me immediately, no matter the hour." As we left the lab, the rising sun casting long shadows across the campus, Sarah placed a hand on my arm. "Be careful, Eleanor. Whether these experiences are objectively real or subjective hallucinations, they're clearly affecting you profoundly. Don't lose yourself in this." Her concern touched me, but I already knew it was too late for such warnings. I was already lost, or perhaps found, in a mystery that stretched beyond the boundaries of conventional science. The entity had chosen me for a purpose, had altered me to serve as a primary node in some renewed network of communication. And deep down, beneath the lingering fear and scientific skepticism, I felt a growing curiosity about what might be revealed. Through this connection, What knowledge might flow between our world and theirs if the repair was truly beginning? Part 3. The Network. The second visitation came 3 nights later. I had prepared this time, setting up video cameras in my bedroom, attaching EEG electrodes to monitor my brain activity, even convincing Sarah to stay in my guest room as a witness. Despite these precautions, the experience followed the same pattern. I woke paralyzed in the early hours, the entity emerged from the shadows, and our communication occurred on a level that left no trace on my recording devices. The cameras showed nothing but me lying motionless in bed. The EEG recorded unusual activity, rapid oscillations between REM and waking states, but no evidence of the visitor. Sarah, sleeping just down the hall, heard and saw nothing unusual. Yet the entity was undeniably present to me, its communication even clearer than before. The preparations progress, it informed me. Others with the marker are being activated through your discovery. The network begins to reform. It showed me visions. People around the world experiencing sudden sleep paralysis episodes, encountering entities similar to mine. Some reacted with terror, others with curiosity. All were being changed in subtle ways, neural pathways reconfiguring, to enhance the connection. What is the purpose of this network? I asked, finding that direct questions were easier now, my thoughts flowing more coherently despite the paralysis. Exchange, it replied. Your kind perceives reality in ways we cannot. We perceive aspects of existence invisible to you. Together, a more complete understanding emerges. Understanding of what? The nature of consciousness, the structure of reality, the approaching transition. That last phrase triggered alarm. What transition? Instead of answering directly, it showed me another vision. A vast, incomprehensible shift in the fabric of reality itself. Something fundamental changing, reordering, evolving. I couldn't grasp the full implications, but sensed both opportunity and danger in the process. Your kind must be prepared, the entity continued. The viewers were created to facilitate this preparation, to translate what comes into terms your species could comprehend. And if we don't want this connection, this preparation, a sensation like cold amusement filtered through its communication. The choice was made long ago, when your ancestors accepted the modification. The marker is your inheritance and your purpose. Before I could press further, the entity placed its appendage on my forehead again, the now familiar cold electricity flowing through me. This time I sensed it was not changing me but reading something, extracting information about our research, our findings, our progress in understanding the SP1 variant. Your scientific methods are useful, it commented. They have accelerated the reactivation process beyond our projections. Continue your work, observer. Identify more carriers. Spread awareness of the marker's significance. With that, it withdrew, fading back into the shadows as the paralysis gradually released me. I sat up, gasping as before, but with less terror and more frustration at the unanswered questions. The recording devices had failed to capture any evidence of the visitation, just as I'd subconsciously expected. Whatever these entities were, they existed in a way that our technology couldn't detect. Or perhaps they could control what our instruments perceived, the same way they seemed to control what humans without the marker could see. Sarah was skeptical when I described the encounter the next morning, but less dismissive than before. My continuing genetic transformation had shaken her scientific certainty. Weekly DNA analyses showed the SP1 variant not only remaining stable in my genome, but apparently spreading, more of my cells showing the modification each time we tested. It's like a controlled genetic mosaic effect, she observed, studying the latest results. The variant is propagating through your somatic cells in a pattern that prioritizes neural tissue. Exactly what you'd expect if it were designed to enhance specific perceptual abilities, I pointed out. She didn't argue this time. Our research had expanded significantly, with Harrington securing additional funding after our preliminary findings generated excitement in the scientific community. We now had teams working on various aspects of the SP1 variant. its evolutionary history, its functional effects on neural processing, its global distribution patterns. Most intriguing were the results from our functional studies. Neurons expressing the SP1 variant responded to stimulus frequencies that normal neurons ignored. Specifically, frequencies in ranges that quantum physicists had theoretically associated with potential membrane vibrations between dimensions. It's as if the variant creates a biological antenna tuned to frequencies outside normal human perception, Dr. Wei explained during a team meeting, his initial skepticism replaced by growing excitement. These neurons are literally designed to detect signals from somewhere else. The implications were profound, but I was careful about how much I shared with the team. My personal experiences with the entity remained known only to Sarah, who maintained her skeptical stance while helping me document the ongoing changes in my physiology and perception. Those changes became increasingly difficult to ignore. My sleep patterns altered dramatically. I required less rest, and what sleep I did get was intensely vivid, filled with information that felt downloaded rather than dreamed. During waking hours, I occasionally perceived subtle distortions in reality, ripples in the air, shadows that moved independently of their sources, flickers of presence at the edge of vision. Your brain is processing input that wasn't accessible before, Sarah theorized after one particularly dramatic incident, where I'd seen what appeared to be geometrical patterns overlaying normal reality during a lab meeting. The question is whether that input represents something objectively real or is simply neural noise being misinterpreted. I knew it was real. The entity had explained that the modification allowed humans to perceive aspects of their reality that overlapped with ours, the adjacent frequency where the architects existed. What I was seeing were glimpses of that overlap, moments where the boundary between dimensions thinned enough for perception to cross. Meanwhile, our expanded study was identifying more individuals with the SP1 variant worldwide. We had developed a simple test that could detect the marker from saliva samples, allowing for broader screening. The variant appeared in approximately 17% of the global population, just as our earlier research had suggested, but with an interesting new development. The expression levels are changing, Dr. Keller reported. Individuals who tested positive for the variant 6 months ago are showing significantly higher expression levels now, even without any intervention or treatment. As if something is activating the gene, Wei suggested. I thought of the entity's words. Others with the marker are being activated through your discovery. The network begins to reform. Our research itself was triggering the activation. The scientific recognition of the marker's existence was somehow enhancing its expression in carriers worldwide. The implications were simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. Reports of sleep paralysis with visual hallucinations had increased dramatically since our preliminary findings had been published in scientific journals and subsequently covered in mainstream media. Thousands of people were experiencing their first episodes, many describing encounters with entities remarkably similar to mine. Some of these individuals contacted our research team directly, desperate to understand what was happening to them. We established a registry to collect their experiences, patterns emerging that matched exactly what the entity had shown me, a network of viewers being activated across the globe. We need to go public with the full implications of our findings, I argued during a tense meeting with Harrington and the department heads. People deserve to know what's happening to them. And tell them what exactly, Harrington countered, that they've been genetically engineered by interdimensional beings to serve as communication nodes, that their sleep paralysis episodes are actually contact events with these entities. If that's where the evidence points, yes, he shook his head firmly. The evidence points to a genetic variant strongly associated with sleep paralysis and certain types of visual processing. Everything beyond that remains speculative. We will maintain scientific rigor in our publications, Dr. Chen. I understood his position, the career-ending ridicule that would follow such extraordinary claims without irrefutable evidence. But I also felt a growing responsibility to the thousands of people experiencing activations without understanding what was happening to them. So I made a decision that would change everything. I created an anonymous online forum called the Marker Network, where people experiencing these phenomena could share their encounters, compare notes, and find some reassurance that they weren't alone or losing their minds. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, thousands of individuals had joined, describing encounters that matched the pattern with remarkable consistency. Paralysis, visitation by tall entities with fluid movements, telepathic communication, about a network being reestablished, and subsequent changes in perception and cognition. Many reported being told they were viewers or observers created to bridge different realities. Many described visions of an approaching transition that would fundamentally alter the relationship between dimensions. And most disturbingly, many reported the entities extracting information about our world, our technologies, our social structures, our vulnerabilities. The forum became a phenomenon itself, attracting media attention and growing concern from various authorities. Some dismissed it as mass hysteria or an elaborate role-playing community. Others, particularly religious organizations, warned of demonic deception. A few fringe scientific voices suggested we might be witnessing genuine contact with non-human intelligence. Through it all, I maintained my anonymity as the forum's creator, while continuing my official research at the university. The dual existence was exhausting but necessary. I needed the scientific resources to understand the physical aspects of the phenomenon, while also needing the unfiltered experiences of those undergoing activation. 6 months after my first encounter, I experienced a visitation unlike any before. The entity that appeared was different, larger, more complex in its geometry, radiating what I can only describe as greater authority. "You have accelerated the process beyond all projections," it communicated, its mental voice deeper and more resonant than my regular visitor. "The network nears critical activation threshold." "What happens at this threshold?" I asked, the paralysis now familiar enough that I could communicate clearly despite it. "The permanent connection is established. The full exchange begins." "Exchange of what?" "Everything." It moved closer, its form shifting in ways that hurt my eyes to track. "Your science has terms for it. Information transfer, technological exchange, cultural integration. But these concepts are insufficient. What approaches is a merging of awareness across dimensional boundaries." The implications were staggering. "A merging? You mean your kind would exist in our reality? And yours in ours?" The boundaries were artificial, imposed after the original connection failed. "The transition will restore the natural state." Fear surged through me. Is this what humanity wants? What if we're not ready for such a merging? Readiness is irrelevant. The transition approaches regardless of preparation. The network was designed to facilitate adaptation, to prevent shock and collapse when the boundaries dissolve. It showed me a vision of what might come, reality itself seeming to fracture and reform, the familiar physical world interpenetrating with something vastly different, humans encountering beings and concepts beyond current comprehension. In some versions of this future, the transition was catastrophic, humanity breaking under the cognitive strain. In others, those with the activated marker served as guides, translators, bridges that helped others adapt. "This is why the viewers were created," the entity explained, "not merely for communication, but for preparation, to prevent the dissolution of your consciousness when the veils between realities thin completely." "When?" I managed to ask. "When does this transition occur?" "It has already begun. The increasing resonance between frequencies, the thinning of boundaries, these are the early stages. Full transition will occur when the network reaches sufficient density. And our forum, our research, we're accelerating this?" "Yes. Awareness strengthens resonance. Recognition activates dormant pathways. Your scientific discovery of the marker has initiated a cascade effect we did not anticipate for several more generations." The entity moved back slightly, its form stabilizing. "There is division among the architects regarding this acceleration. Some believe your kind requires more preparation. Others see opportunity in the hastened timeline. And which side are you on? I asked. I observe. I report. I do not decide. It paused, then added, but I would prefer your species survive the transition intact. The viewers were created for this purpose, to ensure continuity of human consciousness through the change. Before departing, it left me with a final message. The network must reach critical threshold in controlled conditions. Guide the activation process observer. Prepare those with the marker for their role. The alternative is uncontrolled transition and likely dissolution of your reality's coherence. When the paralysis lifted, I remained in bed for hours, contemplating the implications. If the entity was telling the truth, we faced an imminent transformation of reality itself, one that would occur whether we were prepared or not. The only variable was how humanity would weather this change, and that apparently depended on the network of activated viewers serving as stability points during the transition. But could I trust what the entity had told me? Was I facilitating humanity's salvation or its subjugation? The uncertainty was agonizing. I needed more information, more perspectives. The next day, I added a new section to the Marker Network forum, specifically for those who had received information about the transition during their encounters. The responses poured in, hundreds of individuals reporting similar visions and warnings, though with interesting variations in the details. Some entities had described the transition as a natural evolutionary process, others as a technological achievement, still others as the fulfillment of an ancient agreement between our species. Some emphasized the benefits of merged realities, others focused on the dangers of uncontrolled transition. But all agreed on the central point. Reality as we knew it was about to change fundamentally, and those with the activated marker would play a crucial role in humanity's survival. I brought this information to Sarah, who had been monitoring my condition while maintaining her scientific skepticism about the entities themselves. To my surprise, she had begun to shift her position. I can't explain what's happening to you, or to the thousands of others reporting similar experiences, she admitted. The changes in your physiology, in your cognition, in your perception, they're objectively measurable, not psychosomatic. And the consistency of the reported encounters across different cultures and languages. Part 1. The first episode. The first time it happened, I thought it was just the usual sleep paralysis, the same crushing weight on my chest, the same desperate struggle to move limbs that wouldn't respond, the same primal terror as consciousness, returned while my body remained frozen in sleep. I'd experienced these episodes sporadically since college, usually during periods of stress, or when my travel schedule disrupted my sleep patterns. But this was different. I was in Denver, room 418 of the Meridian Grand. On the third night of a sales conference, the paralysis struck around 4 a.m., pulling me from a dreamless sleep into that terrible liminal space. Awake but unable to move. The weight pressed down, heavier than usual, squeezing the air from my lungs in shallow, insufficient gasps. Then, I saw it. Standing at the foot of the bed was a figure, tall and unnaturally thin, its proportions subtly wrong in ways my panicked mind couldn't quite process. It wore what appeared to be a dark suit, but the fabric rippled and shifted as if underwater. Where its face should have been was a blank oval of pale, featureless skin. I'd experienced hypnagogic hallucinations during sleep paralysis before. Shadowy figures, strange noises, the sensation of someone else in the room. But never anything this vivid, this specific. Never anything that seemed to notice me. The figure tilted its head, the motion too fluid, too smooth. Then it moved toward the side of the bed, each step silent against the hotel carpet. It leaned down, that blank face hovering inches from mine. I strained against the paralysis, desperate to move, to scream, to do anything. A seam appeared in the smooth skin of its face widening into what might have been a smile on a human. The room temperature plummeted, my breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air, Then, as suddenly as it began, the paralysis broke. I jackknifed upright, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was empty, the temperature normal. Nothing remained of the encounter except my terror and the lingering certainty that what I'd seen hadn't been a typical sleep paralysis hallucination. I didn't sleep again that night. When morning came, I checked out of the hotel a day early, making excuses to my colleagues about a family emergency. On the flight home to Chicago, I convinced myself it had been an unusually vivid episode triggered by conference stress and too much hotel coffee. 3 weeks later, I was in Atlanta for a client meeting. Different city, different Meridian Grand Hotel, but by chance the same room number, 418. I noticed the coincidence when the desk clerk handed me the key card, but thought nothing of it until 4 a.m., when I woke to the weight on my chest and the tall figure standing at the foot of the bed. This time it spoke. "You returned." The voice seemed to bypass my ears, resonating directly inside my skull, a sound like dry leaves rustling against concrete. Few return willingly. I hadn't returned willingly. It was coincidence, random chance that put me in another room, 418. But I couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only watch as the figure again approached the bed and leaned down toward me. "The boundary thins," it whispered. "Soon we won't need the doors." The paralysis broke and I was alone again, shaking and soaked with cold sweat. I checked out immediately, despite the pre-dawn hour, ignoring the concerned looks from the night manager. On the drive to the airport, I called my doctor and made an appointment for the following day. There had to be a medical explanation, a neurological issue perhaps, or a reaction to some medication. Dr. Winters listened patiently to my description of the episodes, his expression neutral and professional. "Classic sleep paralysis," he concluded after examining me. "Though the consistency of the hallucination across 2 episodes is somewhat unusual. Any major stressors in your life currently? Changes in sleep patterns?" "Just the usual travel schedule," I replied. "I'm on the road 3 weeks out of 4, different time zones, different hotels." "That's likely the trigger then. Sleep disruption is a known risk factor." He wrote something on his prescription pad. "I'm recommending a mild sedative to help regulate your sleep cycle when traveling, and perhaps consider reducing your travel schedule if possible." I took the prescription but knew reducing travel wasn't an option. As a regional sales director for a medical equipment company, being on the road was non-negotiable. All I could do was avoid the Meridian Grand chain in the future, a minor inconvenience even though they were often the most convenient option for business travelers. For 6 months, this strategy worked. I stayed in Hiltons, Marriotts, and Hyatts, experiencing only occasional mild sleep paralysis episodes without the terrifying figure. I almost convinced myself the 2 incidents had been anomalies, stress-induced hallucinations given consistency by the coincidence of the room numbers. Then came Boston and the snowstorm that changed everything. I was scheduled to stay at the Hyatt near the convention center, but a record-breaking blizzard had stranded travelers throughout the city. The Hyatt had given away my room when I couldn't arrive by check-in time. After calling a dozen hotels, I found a single available room at, of course, the Meridian Grand. "You're in luck, Mr. Keller," the desk clerk said, tapping at her computer. "We have 1 room left due to a last-minute cancellation." I should have asked the room number, should have insisted on any room but 418, but I was exhausted after hours of travel delays and grateful just to have a place to sleep. It wasn't until I inserted the key card and the door swung open that I saw the number, 418, and felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I stood frozen in the doorway, my rational mind arguing that the previous experiences had been hallucinations, that room numbers were meaningless, that I was being ridiculous. I should have listened to my fear, should have slept in the lobby, or in my rental car, or anywhere but that room. But professional habit and rational thinking overrode my instincts. I entered the room, placed my suitcase on the luggage rack, and began my usual unpacking routine. The room looked identical to every other Meridian Grand I'd stayed in. The same beige walls, the same abstract artwork, the same heavy curtains and king-sized bed. Nothing sinister, nothing unusual. just standard corporate hotel decor designed to be inoffensive and forgettable. I considered asking for a different room but felt foolish. What would I say? That I was afraid of the number 418? That I'd had bad dreams in similarly numbered rooms? They'd think I was crazy or worse, one of those superstitious travelers who demanded rooms based on feng shui or numerology. Instead, I took a double dose of the sedative Dr. Winters had prescribed, hoping it would suppress any sleep paralysis episodes. I set up my laptop, reviewed my presentation for the next day, and ordered room service. Normal activities in a room that felt increasingly abnormal as evening deepened into night. When I finally lay down to sleep, the digital clock on the nightstand read 11:42 p.m. I remember checking it specifically, calculating that I'd get about 6 hours of sleep before my 6 a.m. alarm. I remember thinking that the sedative was working, that my eyelids felt heavy, that perhaps this time would be different. I woke to paralysis and the sound of the clock radio changing from 4:17 to 4:18 a.m. The figure stood at the foot of the bed, but it wasn't alone. 2 others flanked it, equally tall, equally wrong in their proportions. They wore the same dark suits, had the same featureless faces. The temperature in the room had dropped so drastically that ice crystals had formed on the inside of the windows. "The willing return," said the central figure, that terrible voice scraping inside my skull. The door opens wider each time. I tried to scream, to move, to do anything but lie there helplessly as the 3 figures approached the bed in perfect synchronization. "Your fear thins the boundary," said the one on the left. "Your awareness strengthens the connection," said the one on the right. The central figure leaned down, that seam widening into its grotesque smile. "Soon we won't need the rooms at all." What happened next defies rational explanation. The blank face seemed to unfold, revealing not features but a darkness that couldn't exist in 3-dimensional space, a void that extended far deeper than the physical confines of the figure's head should have allowed. I felt myself being pulled toward that impossible darkness as if it generated its own gravity. Something brushed against my mind, an alien consciousness, vast and cold and utterly inhuman. For a brief, terrible moment I sensed its intentions, its hunger, its ancient patience. Then the hotel fire alarm blared, shattering the paralysis. I fell from the bed, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, as strobing emergency lights filled the room. The figures were gone, if they had ever been there at all. The hotel was evacuating due to a small kitchen fire. Nothing serious, but enough to trigger the alarms and sprinklers on several floors. I joined the crowd of disgruntled guests in the lobby, still shaking from my encounter, clutching my hastily grabbed phone and wallet. As we waited for the all-clear, I noticed a man watching me from across the lobby, middle-aged, with salt and pepper, hair in the same haunted expression I'd seen in my own mirror after previous episodes. When our eyes met, he nodded slightly, then approached. "Room 418?" he asked without preamble. I stared at him, shock rendering me momentarily speechless. "I thought so," he continued, his voice low. "You have the look. My name's Daniel Weiss. When they let us back upstairs, don't return to your room. Meet me in the hotel bar instead. There are things you need to know." Before I could respond, he pressed a business card into my hand and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of milling guests. The card was simple: Daniel Weiss, consultant, with a phone, number and email address. Nothing to indicate what kind of consultant he might be, or why he would recognize what had happened to me. An hour later, after the fire department had cleared the hotel for re-entry, I found myself facing a choice: return to room 418, or meet this stranger who somehow knew about my experience. Curiosity and fear warred within me. In the end, fear of returning to that room won out. Daniel Weiss was waiting at a corner table in the deserted hotel bar, nursing what looked like scotch. He gestured to the chair across from him as I approached. "You made the right choice," he said. "Going back to the room would have been unwise." "Who are you?" I demanded, remaining standing. "How did you know about my room number?" "Sit, please. This conversation will be easier if we don't attract attention." He waited until I reluctantly took the seat before continuing. I recognized the signs, the disorientation, the fear, the way you kept looking over your shoulder. I've seen it before in others, and in myself. You've experienced it too? The paralysis, the figures? He nodded grimly. Room 418 of the Meridian Grand in Seattle 3 years ago. Then again in Chicago, then Dallas. Always room 418. Always at 418 in the morning. Always the same visitors. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bar's air conditioning. What are they? That's the question, isn't it? Daniel took a sip of his scotch. The simple answer is that we don't know. Not with certainty. The working theory among those of us who've experienced them is that they're entities from somewhere else. Another dimension, perhaps, or another frequency of reality that occasionally overlaps with ours. It sounded insane. Would have sounded insane to me a year ago, before Denver and Atlanta and now Boston. But after what I'd experienced, why room 418? Why that specific time? That's where it gets interesting. Daniel pulled out a tablet and opened a document. The Meridian Grand chain was founded in 1978 by a man named Edward Meridian. On the surface, a typical hotel magnate building a luxury brand. But Meridian had other interests, specifically in boundary spaces between dimensions. He turned the tablet toward me, showing a photograph of a severe-looking man in an expensive suit, standing in front of the first Meridian Grand Hotel at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Meridian was a high-ranking member of an esoteric order called the Threshold Society, before he made his fortune in real estate. The society believed that certain locations, under certain conditions, formed thin places, where the boundary between dimensions could be crossed. Like room 418 at 4:18 a.m., I murmured. Exactly. The room numbering wasn't coincidental. The entire architectural design of Meridian Grand Hotels incorporates elements the Threshold Society believed would facilitate these crossings. The specific dimensions of the rooms, the placement of windows and mirrors, even the materials used in construction, all designed to create these thin places. I thought about the identical layouts of the rooms I'd stayed in. The same dimensions, the same furnishings, the same artwork. Not just corporate standardization, but deliberate replication of specific conditions. But why? What's the purpose? Daniel's expression darkened. That's what we're trying to determine. Meridian died in 1992, but the hotel chain continued expanding under the direction of the board of directors, all members of the Threshold Society. They've been careful, patient, creating these spaces throughout major cities, waiting. Waiting for what? Based on what some of us have experienced in those rooms? Nothing good. He finished his scotch and set the glass down carefully. There's a network of us now, people who've had encounters in room 418. We're documenting the phenomena, tracking patterns, trying to understand what the Threshold Society is planning. It was overwhelming. Too much to process after the night I'd had. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as the ravings of a conspiracy theorist, to return to my comfortable worldview where such things couldn't exist. But the memory of that featureless face unfolding into impossible darkness was too vivid, too real. What do you want from me? I asked finally. Information, for now. Your experiences, documented as precisely as you can remember them. And vigilance. The encounters are increasing in frequency and intensity. Whatever is coming through those thin places is getting stronger, more present in our reality. He handed me a small notebook. My contact information is inside, along with a secure email address for sending your account. Don't stay in room 418 again, at any Meridian Grand. In fact, avoid the chain entirely if you can. And if I can't? My job requires extensive travel, and sometimes the Meridian is the only option. Then request a different room. Any other room, and if they insist on putting you in 418, which has happened to others in our network, too frequently to be coincidence, walk away. Sleep in your car if you have to. The alternative is... He trailed off, his expression haunted. What? What happens if I stay in that room again? Daniel met my gaze directly. The boundary gets thinner each time. Eventually, they won't just visit during sleep paralysis. They'll come through completely, and they'll take you back with them. I left Boston the next morning, having spent the remainder of the night in the hotel lobby rather than returning to room 418. On the flight home, I wrote down everything I could remember about my 3 encounters, then sent the account to the IDCAI secure email Daniel had provided. The response came within hours, a welcome to what they called the 418 network, and access to a private forum where others shared their experiences. Reading through their accounts, I found chilling similarities to my own. The same figures, the same time, the same progression of encounters becoming more intense with each stay in room 418. I also found something that turned my unease to genuine fear. Reports of travelers who had experienced multiple episodes and then disappeared. People like James Chen, a pharmaceutical rep who had documented 5 encounters before checking into the Meridian Grand in Phoenix and never checking out. Or Sophia Williams, a corporate trainer who had reported increasingly vivid visitations before vanishing from room 418 in the Miami location, leaving all her belongings behind. Official explanations ranged from voluntary disappearances to mental health crises, but members of the network were convinced of a darker truth. The boundary had thinned enough for these people to be taken. As I scrolled through the forum, one post caught my attention. A historical document from the Threshold Society, obtained through means the poster declined to specify. It contained a passage that made my blood run cold. The grand work proceeds according to design. Each threshold room serves as an anchor point, a beacon calling across the divide. Each visitation strengthens the connection. When sufficient crossings have occurred at each location, the final threshold will open, not limited to a single room or moment, but a permanent doorway through which the waiting ones will enter in their multitude. The final threshold, the waiting ones. The document read like the ravings of a cult, except that I had seen them, had felt the alien touch of their consciousness against my own. That night, in the safety of my own apartment, I made a decision. I couldn't simply document my experiences and avoid room 418. If what the network believed was true, if the Threshold Society was deliberately creating these thin places for some grand and terrible purpose, then someone needed to expose them, to bring their esoteric machinations into the light of public scrutiny. I had no idea then how deep the conspiracy went, or how dangerous my decision would prove to be. I only knew that I had glimpsed something beyond the boundaries of normal reality, and I couldn't simply look away and continue my life as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I began my investigation into the Meridian Grand Hotel chain and the Threshold Society that controlled it, an investigation that would lead me into darkness far deeper than I could have imagined, and to truths more terrifying than the entities in room 418. Part 2. The Network. The 418 network operated with the caution of people who knew they were pursuing something dangerous. New members were vetted carefully. Communications were encrypted and real names were rarely used. My business travel schedule made me valuable to them. I could visit Meridian Grand locations across the country, gathering information without raising suspicion. "We need to understand the full scope of what they're doing," explained Rebecca, one of the network's coordinators, during a secure video call. Her face was partially obscured, her background generic enough to be anywhere. How many room 418s exist? Whether they're all active, what triggers the visitations? Active? I questioned. "We've documented varying levels of activity across different locations," she clarified. "Some room 418s produce encounters consistently, while others seem dormant. We're trying to determine the pattern." My first assignment was simple reconnaissance. Check into the Meridian Grand in Minneapolis, but request a room other than 418. Observe the layout, take discrete photographs of architectural details, and note any unusual features or staff behaviors. The hotel appeared perfectly normal, the same upscale business aesthetic as other locations, the same efficient, professional staff. I requested room 517, mentioning casually that I preferred higher floors. The desk clerk accommodated without hesitation, though I caught a flicker of something, relief perhaps, when I didn't end up in 418. That night, I explored the hotel, trying to appear as just another restless business traveler. The fourth-floor hallway felt subtly different from the fifth, the air slightly cooler, the lighting a touch dimmer. I walked past room 418 twice, feeling a faint pressure in my ears, both times, like the sensation when descending in an airplane. I didn't approach the door directly. Daniel had warned that proximity alone could sometimes trigger experiences, especially for those who had previous encounters. Instead, I used my phone to discreetly photograph the hallway, the door, the space beneath it. Later, reviewing the images in my room, I noticed something odd, a faint distortion around the door frame of 418, visible only when the images were enhanced. Almost like heat shimmer, but in a climate-controlled hallway. I sent the photographs to Rebecca along with my observations. Her response was immediate. Definitely active. The distortion is consistent with other locations where encounters have been reported. Good work, but be careful. Prolonged exposure to active sites can have effects even without entering the room. Over. The next 3 months, I visited 7 Meridian Grand hotels across the country, always as part of legitimate business travel, always requesting rooms away from the 4th floor. I documented subtle architectural anomalies that appeared across all locations. The specific proportions of hallways leading to room 418, the placement of mirrors that created unusual light effects, the recurrence of certain geometric patterns in the carpet and wallpaper designs. The network analyzed my findings alongside data from other members, building a comprehensive picture of the Threshold Society's work. A pattern emerged. Room 418 existed in every Meridian Grand, regardless of the hotel's overall size or layout. Even in locations where normal room numbering would have placed 418 elsewhere, the sequence was adjusted to maintain that specific designation. More disturbing were the personnel patterns we uncovered. Each hotel had at least 3 staff members, always including someone in management who belonged to the Threshold Society. They used subtle identifiers, a particular tie pin for men, a specific style of brooch for women. Once I knew what to look for, I spotted them consistently across different locations. They're monitoring the rooms, theorized Daniel during a secure conference call with senior network members. Tracking which ones are most active, which guests have encounters. But to what end? Asked another member, a professor of theoretical physics whose interest in the network stemmed from an encounter in the San Francisco location. If they're creating these thin places deliberately, what's their ultimate goal? The final threshold, I suggested, recalling the document I'd seen. Whatever that means. We need internal documents, Rebecca said. Floor plans, maintenance records for room 418, communications between society members, something that explains the purpose behind all this. The implication was clear. Someone needed to access restricted areas of a Meridian Grand, to find information not available through normal channels. As the newest member of the network, I expected this task to fall to someone more experienced. Instead, all eyes turned to me. Your sales background makes you ideal, Daniel explained after the others had logged off. You can move through these spaces without arousing suspicion. You have a legitimate reason to be in these hotels. Breaking into offices and stealing documents is a bit beyond legitimate business travel, I pointed out. We're not asking you to break in, just explore opportunities. The Denver location has a management office with particularly lax security, according to our information. If you could find a way to access it during business hour, I should have refused. Should have limited my involvement to observation and documentation. But the memory of those entities, their impossible geometry, their hunger, drove me to agree. 2 weeks later, I checked into the Meridian Grand Denver for a regional sales meeting. The same hotel where I'd had my first encounter months earlier. The familiar surroundings sent a chill through me, despite being on the 6th floor this time, far from room 418. The opportunity came during a fire alarm on my second day. Not a real emergency, just a system test that required brief evacuation. In the controlled chaos of guests and staff moving toward exits, I slipped away from my group and down a service corridor I'd identified earlier, leading to the management offices. The outer office was empty, the staff having evacuated with everyone else. The door to the hotel manager's private office was locked, but a quick search of the receptionist's desk yielded a spare key in an unlabeled envelope. Careless security that worked in my favor. Inside, I photographed everything that seemed relevant. A floor plan showing unusual structural elements around room 418, maintenance logs noting threshold calibration procedures performed monthly, and most significantly, a leather-bound book hidden in a locked drawer containing what appeared to be ritual instructions. The photographs I took of those pages revealed disturbing details, precise measurements for room dimensions, furniture placement, and mirror positioning, instructions for subtle energetic attunement of the space, and references to facilitating transit for the waiting ones through momentary thinning of the veil at the appointed hour. I barely made it out before staff returned, rejoining my colleagues with a story about getting lost during the evacuation. That night I transmitted the images to the network through our secure channel, my hands shaking as I typed the accompanying notes. Their response was immediate. This was the evidence they'd been seeking, confirmation that the Threshold Society was deliberately engineering these rooms as crossing points for entities from elsewhere. But the documents raised as many questions as they answered. What was the final threshold mentioned repeatedly in the ritual book? Why the specific time of 4:18 a.m.? And most urgently, how close were they to achieving whatever grand design they were working toward? The timing can't be coincidental, the physics professor noted in our emergency conference call. 418 corresponds to a specific frequency in certain quantum resonance models, a frequency that theoretical physicists have associated with potential membrane contact between dimensional brains. In English, Professor, Daniel prompted, it's a time when the fabric between dimensions may be naturally thinner. They're exploiting an existing weakness, amplifying it through these carefully designed spaces. Rebecca's voice was grim. According to these maintenance logs, they're increasing the calibration frequency. Whatever they're building toward, it's accelerating. We need to go public with this, I argued. Expose what they're doing. With what evidence? Daniel countered. Photographs of maintenance logs and a book of what looks like nonsense to anyone who hasn't experienced the entities. We'd be dismissed as conspiracy theorists or mental health cases. Then we need more concrete evidence, I insisted. Something irrefutable. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Finally, Rebecca spoke. There is one way. We could document an actual visitation, capture one of these entities on video. That would require someone to stay in room 418, the professor pointed out. Given what we know now, that's extremely dangerous. All eyes turned to me again, the newest member, the one who had already proven willing to take risks. No, Daniel said firmly, surprising me. He's had 3 encounters already. The boundary would be too thin. They might take him completely. I'll do it, I heard myself say, despite Daniel's warning. But not alone and not without precautions. If we're going to do this, we do it right. Multiple cameras, monitoring from adjacent rooms, emergency protocols if something goes wrong. The plan came together over the next week, a carefully orchestrated operation to document what happened in room 418 at 4:18 a.m. We selected the Phoenix location, where a network member named Eliza worked in housekeeping and could ensure adjacent rooms were available for our team. Daniel and Rebecca would monitor from room 416, with the professor and another member in room 420. I would stay in 418, wired with sensors to track my vital signs and surrounded by cameras positioned to capture every angle of the room. Eliza would be our inside person, ready to trigger fire alarms or other emergency protocols if necessary. We prepared as thoroughly as possible, studying the ritual book for insights into what might happen and how to potentially disrupt it. The professor developed a theory that certain electromagnetic frequencies might interfere with the thinning process, and designed a device that could generate those frequencies if needed. Despite these precautions, as the day of the operation approached, my anxiety grew. I remembered the entity's words from my last encounter. Soon we won't need the rooms at all. What if our attempt to document them only strengthened their connection to our reality? What if we were playing directly into the Threshold Society's plans? The night before I was to fly to Phoenix, I received an encrypted message from an unknown sender, a single line of text. They know what you're planning. 4 at 18, network compromised, abort. I immediately contacted Daniel, who called an emergency conference. The message's authenticity couldn't be verified, but we couldn't ignore the possibility of a security breach. After heated debate, we decided to proceed with enhanced caution, changing our arrival times using different identities than planned, and adding additional exit strategies. What we didn't know then, couldn't have known, was that the warning was legitimate, and our adjustments were insufficient. The Threshold Society had been aware of the 418 network for years, monitoring our investigations, sometimes even facilitating our discoveries when it served their purposes. We were never the hunters. We were the prey, being drawn deeper into their design with each step we took to oppose them. I arrived in Phoenix on a Tuesday afternoon, checking into the Meridian Grand under the name Michael Torres, an identity created specifically for this operation. The desk clerk who processed my check-in wore the distinctive tie pin of the Threshold Society, though he gave no indication of recognizing me or suspecting my purpose. "We have you in room 418, Mr. Torres," he said, sliding the key card across the counter. "Is that acceptable?" "Perfect," I replied, maintaining a casual demeanor despite the chill that ran through me. According to our adjusted plan, I had specifically not requested room 418 to avoid drawing attention. The fact that I'd been assigned that room anyway confirmed our suspicions. The society tracked and directed certain guests to their threshold rooms. The room looked identical to the other 418s I'd encountered. Same layout, same furnishings, same abstract artwork that I now recognized contained subtle iterations of the geometric patterns found in the ritual book. I performed a thorough sweep for surveillance devices before setting up our own equipment. Cameras disguised as ordinary objects, sensors hidden in furniture, the professor's electromagnetic device concealed in my laptop bag. Daniel and Rebecca checked in separately, establishing themselves in room 416 with monitoring equipment. The professor and his colleague took room 420. Eliza confirmed all was ready from her position in housekeeping. By midnight, our operation was fully in place, all communications running through encrypted channels. I lay on the bed fully clothed, ostensibly watching television, while actually observing the room for any unusual phenomena. The digital clock on the nightstand seemed to move with excruciating slowness toward the critical hour. At 3:45 a.m., I felt the first change, a subtle pressure drop, as if the room had been sealed off from the outside world. The temperature began to fall, my breath becoming visible in the increasingly frigid air. "Temperature dropping," I murmured into the concealed microphone. "Down to approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit and still falling. Cameras are picking up unusual light distortions near the bathroom door," Rebecca's voice responded in my earpiece. "Thermal imaging shows cold spots forming throughout the room." At 4:80 a.m., the electronic devices began to malfunction, television flickering, lights dimming, the digital clock freezing at 4:80, despite the passing minutes. "We're losing camera feeds," Daniel reported, tension evident in his voice. "Only 2 still operational. The professor's equipment is detecting massive electromagnetic fluctuations." I felt the familiar heaviness settling into my limbs, the prelude to sleep paralysis. Fighting against it, I sat up, moved around the room, tried to maintain full consciousness. "They're coming," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "I can feel it. The paralysis is starting." "Activate the professor's device," Rebecca instructed urgently. "Now, before you lose mobility." I staggered to the laptop bag, fumbling with the device, a small metal box with a simple switch. As my fingers closed around it, the paralysis hit fully, dropping me to the floor. I managed to flip the switch as I fell, the device clattering beside me. A high-pitched whine filled the room, painful in its intensity. The pressure increased dramatically, my ears popping as if I'd descended thousands of feet in seconds. Through increasingly blurred vision, I saw the air near the bathroom door ripple and tear. Not a metaphorical tearing, but an actual rending of what looked like the fabric of space itself. Something was coming through. Not the humanoid figures from my previous encounters, but something larger, more complex in its geometry. A mass of angles and planes that seemed to fold through dimensions my mind couldn't process. It extruded into the room partially, its full form clearly too vast to fit through the opening. A voice filled my head, drowning out the professor's device, drowning out my own thoughts. The final threshold approaches. Your resistance accelerates the process. Each attempt to observe strengthens the connection. The message wasn't directed at me specifically, but at all of us, the entire network. I felt the entity's awareness expand outward, touching the minds in the adjacent rooms, reaching further to other members across distances that should have made such contact impossible. Your network serves our purpose. Always has. The observers become the door. With horrifying clarity, I understood. Our investigations, our documentation, our very awareness of the phenomenon had been strengthening it all along. The Threshold Society hadn't been trying to stop us. They had been cultivating us, using our focused attention and fear to enhance the thinning process. The tear in reality pulsed, widening. More of the entity pushed through, bringing with it a cold that went beyond physical sensation, a cold that seemed to freeze thought itself. I felt my consciousness beginning to fragment under its proximity. Through the last functioning camera, Daniel and Rebecca must have seen something of what was happening. The fire alarm suddenly blared throughout the hotel, breaking the entity's concentration momentarily. The tear contracted slightly. "Get out now." Rebecca's voice crackled through the failing earpiece. "Coming to extract, don't look at..." The door burst open, Daniel rushing in with some kind of device that emitted a strobing light. The effect on the entity was immediate. It recoiled from the light, the tear constricting further. I felt the paralysis weaken enough to move my limbs. "Don't look directly at it," Daniel shouted, pulling me to my feet. "Focus on me, on the door, move." We stumbled into the hallway, the professor and his colleague emerging from room 420, both looking shaken. Rebecca met us from the other direction, her face pale. "The emergency stairs," she directed. "Eliza's holding the service exit open on the ground floor." As we fled down the stairwell, alarms blaring. Thanks for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed tonight's chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that keep you up at night. Share your favorite part in the comments. We're always watching, and remember, at Nocturnal Narrative Studio, the night never truly ends.